So this is my presentation on the social and political issues dealt with in the film What If a Thousand Clarinets. Firstly, I think it's important to define what I seek to discuss. I'm defining a social issue as terms that relate to the organisation and behaviour of society, particularly the values, norms and cultural dynamics the film critiques or supports or reflects upon. And I'd also define a political issue as those issues that focus on the critique or support of power structures, authority and ideological frameworks. So, a brief synopsis of the film. What If a Thousand Clarinets is a whimsical Czechoslovak musical comedy that blends fantasy, satire and social commentary. The story unfolds in a military barracks where, through a magical twist, all the soldiers' weapons are transformed into musical instruments. Chaos ensues as the soldiers, initially perplexed, embrace the joy of music and abandon their militaristic roles. The film features vibrant performances, playful romances and satirical humour, celebrating creativity and peace while critiquing authoritarian structures and the absurdity of war. The film tangles with various social and political issues. Most evidently, it takes a nuanced anti-war stance. This presentation will seek to explore these and analyse these issues. So the first issue I'd like to discuss is the nuanced anti-war stance. So, What If a Thousand Clarinets critiques militarism by showing its absurdity and offering pacifism and creativity as preferable alternatives to this, though it acknowledges that violence sometimes persists, even in attempts to establish peace. In a particular notable scene, a mounted machine gun transforms into a grand piano. I thought this was particularly impactful when I was watching the film. This moment, along with the broader transformation of all soldiers' weapons into musical instruments, mainly clarinets, serves as a poignant rejection of violence. Initially bewildered, the soldiers gradually embrace their joy of music, abandoning the rigid militaristic roles. The machine guns The machine gun to piano transformation visually encapsulates the film's anti-war message, contrasting the destructive potential of militarism with the unifying power of art and creativity. Nonetheless, the message has nuance. It is not a complete rejection of violence, but only where it is completely necessary. As you point out, the film is amazingly subversive. In its final scenes, the film calls for an armed rebellion against an authoritarian regime, very reminiscent of communist Czechoslovakia. This highlights the complexity of its pacifist message, acknowledging that in some cases, resistance may require force to challenge oppressive systems. The final scene is an allegory of this idea. The character is surrounded only fights back with encouragement from the ghost of back. This is fundamentally a last resort act. So there's important historical context to this anti-war stance, and it kind of intertwines with the expanding freedoms within Czechoslovakia at the time. The 1960s in Czechoslovakia marked a period of growing cultural liberalisation under the shadow of an authoritarian communist regime, established after the 1948 coup. While the government enforced censorship in line with Eastern Bloc militarisation, artists and intellectuals used satire and metaphor to subtly critique the system, paving the way for the Prague Spring of 1968, a brief but pivotal push for reform. Hyman notes many artists, sensing increased freedom on the part of the playwrights and literacy critics, audiences, under the cover of darkness grew bolder. However, I think this is quite a unique to Czechoslovakia. Pacifist ideals were complicated by the political realities of the time. Quite just skepticism towards Western powers rooted in the trail of the 1938 Munich Agreement coexisted with lingering support for the Soviet Union, seen by some as a protector against Western duplicity. As Benioff observed, the Czechoslovaks until 1968 had nothing against Russia or the Soviet Union. And that was a bit I edited because it says before 1968. I'm sorry for that. This reflects the contradiction within Czech society, a desire for greater freedom alongside an alignment, or at least an indifference, with a state that actively opposed it. So another issue it explores is gender dynamics within society. So the film reflects an evolving gender dynamics of the 1960s, capturing both progressive elements and stereotypes. Romantic subplots feature prominently, with playful interactions between male and female characters. While these moments embrace mutual respect and a sense of freedom, they also lean into traditional portrayals of women as secondary to male-driven narratives. Women's role in the film, while active, often confirms the supportive and nurturing archetypes common to the era. That said, the inclusion of women as participants in the film's symbolic transformation from militarism to music remains noteworthy. But like many films of the time, women are shown engaging with the central themes of harmony and creativity, contributing to the film's broader vision of peace. Their presence, while limited in depth, reflects a step forward for its era, suggesting a growing acknowledgement of women's roles in cultural and societal change. Though the film's portrayal of gender is not revolutionary and includes dated stereotypes, it still represents progress for its time. By offering women a place within its utopian vision, the film subtly aligns with the broader cultural shifts of the 1960s, hinting at the possibility of greater equality in the future. As Ramet and others note, there was an uneven pattern of gender role change that had occurred by the 1960s in Czechoslovakia, indicating slow but continued development of women's equality in post-war Czechoslovakia. So another social and political issue really is the rejection of socialist realism and artistic authority. I feel it's important to define what socialist realism is, and it's an official artistic doctrine imposed in communist states, including Czechoslovakia from the 1940s onwards. It mandated that all art, literature, film, music and visual arts serve the goals of the state by glorifying socialism, the working class and the Communist Party. Art was required to depict an idealised vision of socialist society, emphasising collective values, class struggle and loyalty to the regime. Czechoslovak socialist realism stuck closely to the Soviet counterparts and began to follow programmatically the Soviet art of the Stalinist era. What If 1,000 Clarinets boldly rejects the artistic authority of socialist realism, the dominant cultural policy in communist Czechoslovakia. The socialist realism demand that art glorify the state and promote socialist ideals, but the film subverts these principles through humour, absurdity and creativity. The transformation of weapons into musical instruments challenges the glorification of militarism. Satirizing authority and presenting art and harmony as alternatives to violence. Its playful tone and embrace of individuality stand in opposition to the collective conformity demanded by socialist realism. By blending satire with a whimsical musical format, the film critiques the propagandistic style and authoritarianism of the time. Reflecting the cultural liberalisation of the 1960s, it celebrates personal expression and creative freedom in defiance of state control. Similarly, the film rejects social conformity and individual freedom. Similar to other Czechoslovak films at the time, such as The Ear and The White Lady, it critiques this. The film explores the tension between social conformity and individual freedom, a significant social issue in communist Czechoslovakia. Under the regime, citizens were expected to align with collective ideals, prioritising loyalty to the state over personal expression or creativity. This enforced conformity stifled individuality and suppressed personal freedoms. The film critiques this societal pressure through the surreal and playful narrative. The transformation of weapons into musical instruments symbolises a rejection of rigid conformity, presenting art and music as liberating forces that allow individuals to express themselves freely. Soldiers, initially confined by strict structures of military life, embrace the joy of music, shedding their uniformity in favour of individuality. However, while rejecting enforced conformity, the film promotes a vision of unity against an oppressor. This is arguably a form of conformity. I disagree because I believe this unity rooted in creativity and mutual consent. It differs from consent because it differs from conformity because it fundamentally lacks consent. It fundamentally requires consent, whilst conformity doesn't care. The characters voluntarily join together to create harmony through music, emphasising collaboration over coercion. This shift highlights the power of collective action when it is consensual rather than imposed. The film's dual celebration of individuality and consensual unity reflects broader societal frustrations with oppressive social structures. By advocating for freedom and voluntary collaboration, What If a Thousand Clarinets offers a vision of a society where creativity and unity replace conformity and repression, aligning with the cultural liberalisation in the 1960s. So in conclusion, the film discusses and highlights an array of social and political issues, which goes to highlight its usefulness as an historical artifact. It highlights these issues explicitly within the film's content, so its anti-war stance and its anti-authoritarian stance. But I also believe we can discover truths through implicit assumptions. So these are issues we can gather not from the artistic intention of the film, but the actual use and role of a certain thing in the film, independently created intention, such as the role of women in the film, which can give us insight into what a woman's role actually was within film and theatre at the time, and broader society at the time. I also would add another point: the fact that the artists can freely express an anti-war stance implicitly implies that they felt like they had the freedom to. So I believe that's another way we can implicitly use the historical artifact as a useful source. So to summarise, overall the film represents a comprehensive historical artifact that can be used as an insight into the societal and political issues of the time.
Very good. Thank you very much. Anybody wanting to add or ask anything?
That's a very good presentation. I like that you found so many different posters of the film. I don't think I'd seen those. This is this red one is.
They're all on
incredible.
IMBD, like the actual.
This is a record, no? That's a little LP record.
Is it the music from it?
It says Czech musical film, 1,000 Clarinets, and then
so
it gives you the names of who directed it and whatever, and that this is of course Jiří Suchý who wrote the lyrics. But is this a cover for a sort of record or?
I got this from IMBD.
All right. Okay. Yes, I know what it is.
It was the photos on there. So
okay.
Maybe
I assumed it's some sort of poster or record.
Yeah, maybe the soundtrack to it as well.
Right. A couple of things I wanted to actually mention to consider. One of them is this role of the women. Now there is this one thing that you didn't mention in the presentation is this role of the media, because that kind of anticipates somehow the awareness that if there is a social revolution, the media will have to be a part of it. And it quite uncannily, when it actually did happen 4 years later, it was a media orgy. Nothing else was really achieved during the Prague Spring. So kind of they were prophets in this sense again. So and there is one kind of I did mention it before, one accompanying feature, which is this concept of celebrity. They are all impressed by this woman presenter, woman reporter. I mean, this is being made fun of because those soldiers are repeating, well, I've always kind of thought about you, but I never thought that I would ever be sitting next to you. And he says it about 5 times, and she said, you already told me that. So, but nevertheless, you can see that they are kind of, also when there are those other singers who when there is that evening meal and everybody kind of is saying, no, this is taken, and they want to keep it for the celebrities. So that there is obviously this notion that you kind of are impressed by celebrity, which in itself kind of seems to be a fairly capitalist concept, and it's slightly stunning that in Czechoslovakia of 1964, this kind of takes place. And so in this connection, is she still sort of repressed as a woman here, this reporter?
I think that's why I mentioned that it was so that they say it's like an uneven development, because I was thinking about other scenes when they like bring the women in on helicopters. Sorry.
Oh, those, yes.
Yeah.
This is true, but they that's a kind of dance team, right? One thing which I had to cut out about 15 minutes of it. I don't know whether you looked it up, but there was another, because the defense minister sent a team of some kind of I don't know, sort of secret police strongmen, right? And they kind of go there to kind of physically destroy it. And there's a scene where this women dance team kind of engages in this kind of ballet, and they kind of incorporate those secret police the sort of strongmen who kind of together run a kind of ballet. So in a way, the women, even though they are just a women's ballet team, they actually play a fairly active role. This is totally their own initiative as well. So I think it is a kind of hybrid thing. This picture, incidentally, is quite interesting. This is quite weird because it looks as though she's holding a laptop, but she couldn't have been because they didn't exist 50 years ago. Yes. So anyway, so so I don't know. I think she is fairly kind of. You also mentioned that the women are not really sort of as usual. The film doesn't delve into the characters of women. What I actually do find quite disturbing in that film, that is that young singer Pavlína Filipovská. You don't know the name. She was actually a kind of protege celebrity because she was the daughter of a very famous comic actor who by then would have been quite old. You know, she comes. This is one of the girls who come with the other girls from that kind of boarding school. You know, those girls that are kind of hijacked, and so this is one other thing, that they may be seen as kind of second class people there, but they are pupils, right? So they are, but nevertheless, that is seen when actually these mature male musicians are kind of making fun of this girl who's singing that song, Kapitáne, kam s tou lodí, Captain, where are you going with that ship, with that boat, right? And that I thought was kind of maybe bordering a little bit on kind of sexual exploitation or whatever. But it is 60 years old. So yes, I would say that maybe is the only kind of questionable scene in it. Don't know, what do you think? Did you record it? I don't know that this, you know, going. But they actually do this to almost everyone there. I mean, mostly women, kind of scratching them under their, which is kind of disgusting, frankly, isn't it? One other thing that could have been mentioned also is the behavior of the commanders. What entitles you to your provocation?
Yeah.
And yet the normal soldiers are not bothered. They are not organizing any conspiracy against the commanders. This paranoia of once they lost their power, so they think everybody must be conspiring against them. That is totally communist. Maybe, I suppose, it would be typically in any other dictatorship. Yeah? So that's what I wanted to add, but otherwise very good presentation, contextual and everything. Thank you very much. Okay, over to you. Yeah, I know. This is so annoying. And now we go to another presentation, Sophie McCulloch, The White Lady. Right.
So, this presentation aims to answer the question, although The White Lady is a comedy, it is at the same time a sharp sociological analysis of how the socialist authoritarian regimes of Eastern Europe worked. What does it tell us and discuss? So, the background of the film. The White Lady was directed by, I'm not sure how to say his name.
Zdeněk Podskalski, okay. It is actually, this is totally irrelevant. Zdeněk is a kind of Czech name. Podskalski is an interesting surname, under the cliffs. It means, well, I don't know. They lived under the cliffs, obviously some kind of village, whatever. Go on.
So it was released in 1965, and this was when Czechoslovakia was under Antonin Novotny's leadership. This film was considered a part of the New Wave cinema. The genre is considered a comedy satire film, and the overarching themes of the film are themes of trust and truth, ignorance and control. So Czechoslovakia during the 1960s. So I've used a few quotes, and I felt that they pretty much summarised what Czechoslovakia was like. So the first quote is, Czechoslovakia declared itself the first country after the Soviet Union to have achieved socialism and so to merit a new constitution, and that was in 1960.
And that was under Novotny actually, yes.
Yeah.
And this is, if I may say, it was quite interesting, and under one of those articles that I have, I think, put into Moodle from Briskelisty, there was quite a lot of comment by some quite knowledgeable readers. And one of them was pointing out that Novotny was really, as president, was really quite a controversial character, because originally he was obviously participating in those crimes of that first Stalinist period, 48-53, although not as a major figure. And so he would be kind of implicated in it. But then he actually did support various, he can't be called a reformist, but he was quite ambiguous in the sense that he supported that writer Procházka, remember, with the films of Kachyňa, and actually allowed quite a lot of tolerance. It's really quite interesting if we compare it after the Soviet invasion. Then you have those 20 years of normalization under that other communist leader, the Slovak Gustav Husák, and that was much more doctrinaire. Even though, as I kept saying, nobody really demanded anybody to believe in it, you just had to repeat it and basically denigrate yourself by it, and nobody cared whether you believed in it. But nevertheless, there was absolutely, yeah, I know, they were quite understandably paranoid in the 70s, because they had actually seen that when you actually allow freedom, it may lead to basically the dismantling of communism. So that they were very wary and didn't allow anything in the 70s, and then maybe 80s, in the second half of the 80s under Gorbachev a little bit, but not really that much. So he was an interestingly controversial character, president and prime and kind of head of the Communist Party, which was more important. And he did have this nonsense. I did bore you about this sort of theory of Marxism that everybody had to know, and everybody was bored with it constantly, and how, you know, you've got these formations, kind of feudalism, capitalism, and then everything ends up in communism, where classes are abolished, and it is irrevocable. It just will happen. And so these people really did believe in it, so Novotny thought, okay, we've already completed the first stage of transition to communism, which is socialism, and ridiculously called the country, stopped calling it Czechoslovak Republic, started calling it Czechoslovak Socialist Republic. End of rant. Go on.
So yeah, they changed their name to Czechoslovak Socialist Republic as well. So, as well, by 1960, the communist regime in Czechoslovakia was proud of what it had achieved. In less than 15 years, the nationalisation of industry and collectivisation of agriculture had been realised. The church effectively were silenced, and the army purged, rival political parties rendered powerless, and the economy reoriented from wartime dependence on Germany to post-war dependence on the Soviet Union and the rest of the Eastern Bloc.
Yeah, I wanted to say about the church, they didn't actually ban it, right? It wasn't like in Russia. People, my father was very Catholic, and he dragged us to mass on Sundays, right? This is and the great uncle was a priest, but it's true because he was before 48 sort of high official in the church, secretary to the archbishop, that they did actually send him to prison for about 9 years, so that was horrendous. But nevertheless, you were allowed to sort of attend classes of religion in school or whatever, which were, but nevertheless you saw it in that film, The White Disease, when the headmaster said to the communists, 2 more people have signed up for religion, you know. So while there were classes in religion, it was frowned upon, and obviously you as parents, if you sent them there, you would get a black tick against your name, I suppose, that you were not properly communist, but they didn't ban it. Anyway, go on.
And as well, during 1963, Slovakia was permitted selected freedoms from censorship, and it was written that the Union of Slovak Writers was suddenly allowed to go beyond the bounds of censorship, and then it was permitted in the Czech-speaking regions of the country. So I felt that to be able to answer the question, we would need a summary of the film. So it was based in a village, Communice.
Do you know, interestingly, both of these films that we are talking about actually do political satire using a kind of miracle, weirdly. Both of them. Anyway, go on.
So Pershta, the White Lady, stepped out from a painting within the castle and granted the wish of an elderly couple to have a water supply system within the house.
It is outrageous that they don't have any water in it, which already under communism. Okay, go on.
And they had put in reports to the committee, and they kept being told, like, no, we would have to dig up all the pipes. And then when the wife of the couple had went in to thank the committee, they were confused about it, but then still took the credit. To bring the White Lady out of the painting, the inscription had to be read aloud on a filming, and the inscription read, "Trust, but measure whom you trust." And that quite highlights one of the overarching themes. When the Municipal National Committee became aware of the good deeds done by the White Lady, they began to accuse each other on favouring certain citizens within the village, because they knew themselves they didn't do it, so it must have been somebody else that had done it. And due to this, a different committee was sent to visit the village. They went to the castle having heard of the mysterious...
Well, having heard, if I may, that keeper of the castle sends them a letter, and he sends it to the ministry, and it is really serious because these are the headquarters. These are the kind of central authorities, right, who are now interfering in the affairs of this small town, right? Go on.
And lo and behold, they see the White Lady coming out of the painting. However, due to the supernatural tone of the good deeds, the committee stole the painting and put it into the vault. So,
because, if I may say, those communist officials at that ministry are saying, well, we don't really care what happens. It depends how you interpret it. Namely, you can lie about it, and that's why they took it away and put it in a vault, thinking that they can order rain and wind about, as was the communist slogan, but they couldn't, because at the end of the film, the lady still leaves that picture.
So, with the first theme being trust and truth, it's important to remember the inscription of the painting. So, trust, but measure whom you trust. And it's important to know that because the owner of the castle, who was...
Again, now everything under communism was state-owned. He wouldn't have been even couldn't be even an owner of a shop, right? But he's the keeper of the castle. He's basically employed by the state to take care of it and take people around in those sightseeing tours, right? So not the owner. Go on.
He was a man who was considered to be a lover of the truth. but his wife was constantly distressed about his love of truth and has continued to put more focus on telling the truth rather than trying to keep the peace. And she had said, there are truths punishable by 20 years imprisonment. But he reports the existence of the ghost, much to his wife's desperation, which causes the outside authorities to become involved. But those who place importance on the truth are a minute few. They are considered to be crazy, and hence why he received a medical. This outlines a sociological aspect to the film, as it outlines that the control over the people in Czechoslovakia prevented much truth-telling, and rather a form of ignorance surrounding such activities, especially considering it could lead to imprisonment. So then you have ignorance. So like previously mentioned, there is a type of ignorance prevalent within the film and in 1960s Czechoslovakia. In the film, it was understood to be easier to ignore certain truths rather than adopt the manner of truth. So within society, there was no room for any minority opinions. It was to be a shared opinion with all. And it's like how, even though people are aware of the ghost, it was easier to ignore the fact that the ghost existed because that's what they were meant to do. And this outlines a sociological approach adopted by the film, that within Czechoslovakia and much of Eastern Europe there were minimal chances to voice concerns, opposing views, and generally have freedom of speech. And I feel that that's quite interesting, considering there was changes for censorship, but in society they still weren't allowed to just tell the truth, the whole truth. So then this links to control. Within Czechoslovakia, control was at its utmost priority of those in power, and the White Lady performing good deeds caused a lack of control, which ultimately led to a breakdown in the communications of the committee due to their accusations of favouritism directed at each other following the instalment of the water supply system in the elderly couple's home. The committee did not perform routine jobs within the village, such as installing the taps in the homes. Instead, they were determined to favour themselves, and that's why there was accusations of favouritism. So this highlights another sociological approach adopted by the film, that whilst there were people in charge, they still manipulated the power that they held to help themselves rather than the people that they were meant to protect, in a sense. So then, to conclude, the rules and regulations within Czechoslovakia had prevented free speech, truth-telling, and any minority opinions from being voiced in society, and this is highlighted through the main character. The manipulation of power and control was prevalent in the 1960s, which is shown through the committee members' lack of efforts in the village as well as the accusations thrown around. So overall, The White Lady is in fact a sharp sociological analysis of how socialist authoritarian regimes of Eastern Europe had worked.
Thank you very much. Any comments? It's all right? Yeah, I just wanted to say that there is one paradox, that it actually criticizes all this kind of oppression and censorship and manipulation, and the fact that people, this is the main criticism, basically go along with the lies, and the one who is kind of struggling to always present the truth is presented a little bit like a comic character. It just tells you a little bit about the whole kind of value system. And yet, there is this film which is totally free and criticizes it, right? And obviously it must have been topical, because otherwise it must be modeled on some kind of experience. Maybe it was modeled on an experience which was slightly earlier than 1965, but basically I do want to kind of stress that this was supposed to be a dictatorship, and kind of it financed its own very harsh criticism, which was really quite comic. Anyway, thank you very much. Yes. Okay, and I'll say a few words. You don't need to continue this for millions of hours. These were good presentations. Do please put them into that on that Moodle at the bottom. Yes, I'll give you that mark here. And anyway, I didn't even see that there are millions of people here, although at the beginning it looked as though there was about one anyway, thank you, welcome then. And tomorrow we are going to do final film associated with my obsession of the 60s, and that is a basically film by Jaromír Jireš called The Joke, made based on a film by Milan Kundera. Milan Kundera was a major, I suppose, Czechoslovak writer. He was born in 1929, died a couple of years ago in the summer. Was it? I think it was last year. He was over 90. He lived in Paris. An interesting life experience. Again, as they all started, he started as a convinced communist, although he always looked at communism critically. Now, if he was born in 1929, at the time of the communist takeover in 1948, he would have been 29. So, sorry, 19, I'm talking rubbish. He would have been a teenager, so he joined the Communist Party as a teenager. And, however, the novel, The Joke, which was published in 1967, kind of develops his own traumatizing experience because he had a girlfriend. I actually didn't know what it was, and I only got it from various friends of his or kind of fellow pupils or whatever, which is difficult because it was bloody millions of years ago, so, you know, but nevertheless. He allegedly had a girlfriend and and they were all incredibly communist, right? And yes, I don't know, he was in bed with her or something, and then after sex or whatever, they talked about politics, and he said, this is ridiculous. They had these, what do they call it, workers' pledges, závazky, right? That everybody kind of had to pledge that they will do something special, and he basically was very critical about how sort of superficial it all is and how hypocritical it is. And she reported him for it. And they expelled him temporarily from university. And this is as you will see, this is the main topic of the film tomorrow. And the topic of that novel, which journalists, especially Western journalists, but I suppose everybody, hailed as a kind of major denunciation of Stalinism, because basically what it is, the main theme of it is you've got this student, his name is Ludvík Jahn. He looks at it way back from the sort of vantage point of the 60s again, when he's a kind of middle-aged man, womanizer, cynic or whatever, traumatized. And he looks back at his times of a student, and he was in love with this beautiful girl who is in the film, called Markéta. And obviously, I suppose, again, as a teenager, he would be obsessed by sex, especially if he didn't have it. And he was trying to get her to love him, and she was obsessed with communism. And while he was trying to organize, got a cottage from a friend where they could, he says, be for a week together, she went to a communist Marxist training course and sent him sort of enthusiastic letters how I learned about how bad Trotsky was, and how I learned about optimism, and it's wonderful here. And he's sexually frustrated, so he sends her a postcard saying, optimism is the opium of the people, long live Trotsky. Open postcard, right? I mean, this in the first place is kind of, okay, they were enthusiastic communists, but they should have maybe known that it was a police state, and they would have possibly known that people were kind of being punished for expressing their non-communist views. And it was really only his own fault that he actually posted this in an open postcard, and she, like his real girlfriend in real life, she reports him, and they, this fictional character Ludvík Jahn, they expel him from university, and he spends 6 years in the mines. Anyway, so it's an interesting film. As they said, it was a total condemnation of Stalinism or communism, But Kundera was irritated by this. He was also later irritated by journalists because he said they simplified everything. He was also incredibly particular about precise expression. When that novel, The Joke, was published in English in the late 60s, I think, or maybe around 1970, in Britain, the publisher kind of made changes to it. Kundera was a musicologist. His father was a famous musicologist, colleague of Janáček, the composer. They were all from Brno. Janáček was from Brno. Janáček is a classical composer of the 20th century. And there's a couple of chapters in the novel about the role of Czech folk song and how it was kind of distorted by the communist authorities. And the English translation cut this out. And it's kind of also changed the order of the chapters, and Kundera was absolutely outraged and made an international scandal and said, I am supposed to be living in communism where there is supposed to be censorship. Never ever during my writing career anything that I ever wrote was ever censored by the communist regime, and the first time I've been censored is when my novel was published in the so-called Western democratic country in the United Kingdom. And it was an incredible scandal, and they had to apologize that they scrapped that publication, and later on, a couple of years later, it came out in a proper translation. So anyway, he was incredibly precise about about his expression, and also he was quite well known. He didn't know English terribly well, and his English translators later he argued with them about idiomatic English. He said this is not correct, and he didn't understand it properly. So anyway, he was slightly obsessive. Yes, this is quite interesting because, anyway, personal experience. I was writing, this is years ago, his kind of biographical sort of essay about him for one American encyclopedia, and the American editor of this encyclopedia told us that if we are writing about writers who are still alive, he should actually send it to them to have it corrected. And I sent it to him, and this was still it was the 80s, and it was the time of these fax machines, right? And I don't know, I faxed it to him and asked him for something, and this was shortly before Christmas, and he faxed back something, asking a question or whatever, and it was on Christmas Eve at about 5 o'clock in the evening, and I basically thought, it's Christmas, I'm not going to be bothering him. Let's leave it until sort of a few days later. And he sent, over the next 12 hours, he sent about 4 obsessive faxes saying, Mr. Čurík, are you there? What's going on? Nothing works in this world, or stuff like that. So what I'm trying to say, he was slightly kind of obsessive. Anyway, so Ludvík Jan, an interesting, this long sort of digression is an introduction to the fact that he was irritated when journalists whom he hated called it a sort of denunciation of the communism, and he later on wrote a preface where he said, it's not a denunciation of communism, give me peace with your denunciation of communism, it's a love story. Well, I don't know whether it's a love story. Anyway, there's another character in the novel called Lucy, which, however, has been eliminated from the film. I just want to say that the novel in itself is very interesting. If you had time to have a look at it sometime, it would be interesting to read it, because it is a warning. How should I put this? Kundera, one other traumatizing thing. What's the time? Anyway, they're going there, they're walking about there, and I hope we're not overrunning. What's the time?
54.
How about 54? Well, I'll finish very quickly. Now, forgot what I was saying. Anyway, all right. Maybe I'll remember. What was I saying?
Lucy.
Yeah. Okay, right. So he was really traumatized by the fact that he was so stupid as to believe in communism, right? And he developed quite kind of theory for the rest of his life that actually our human brain is totally incapable, insufficient, stupid. This is the real joke that God has made on us, that He's created us with stupid brains that don't understand anything, don't understand the complexity of the real world, right? And the structure of that novel is such that you've got 3 or 4 characters who are telling you in different chapters the same story, but their interpretation of what's going on is different. So you can't really tell what was the real truth. And anyway, the impact of the film is primarily that Ludwig Jan is autistic, and he doesn't realize that really it was all his own fault. And he basically, yes, of course, Stalinism was a cruel regime, and it is a film about a cruel regime and how it traumatized people and destroyed their lives. But nevertheless, it is also a study of the insufficiency of the human mind. So anyway, I'll stop here. Don't want to bore you anymore. Just wanted to do you this brief introduction, and we'll have a look at it tomorrow. Thank you very much. Okay. Right. And